towards this process. So basically, the way I start, I'm just gonna remove all the basic layers. I take a blank canvas and I will fill it with a few, rectangles. The dimensions of this rectangle are basically those of your, at least the proportions of the rectangles are those of your final piece, right? So know in advance if you're going to do a splash art, kind of horizontal composition, have, your rectangles disposed accordingly. If it's a vertical composition like a Hearthstone, minion cards, then do that as well. And what I do from there is basically fill these rectangles in a sort of cold blue, and the reason for that is that it sort of contrasts with a here are like some silhouettes, and if I want to add a lighting on the silhouettes, you see like a strong front light, a strong warmer frontal light will contrast nicely with a colder, less saturated blue background. So I sort of start like this, regardless, by the way, of the final color scheme of your piece. This is just a sort of a uniform way of doing things that actually works. I just want to show you. I use it even for my illustrations in Hearthstone. As you can see, the final amount of light changes. The placement of the lights is essentially the same. The colors also change, of course, but I just wanted to show you this here. You see how this rim light on the side is the same, on the final character arc. All the placement of the rim light is the same. The placement of the bounce light is the same. It's just a kind of a simplified version of that. So just to let you know, this is not using this blue and sort of darker silhouettes actually works for any color scheme. At least I prefer doing this than starting in black and white, just because in black and white you don't have the color contrast, you just have value contrast, and so you have to eventually solve that problem, right? This relationship between colors. And so the earlier you break the ice, so to speak, the better. At least that's what I recommend. So okay, what I would start at this stage is just select this color there, the background color, just darken it, and on a new layer I would using the wet brush being one of the brushes that I share in my package. I think you have it, or if you don't, if you lost it, feel free to ask for it again. But anyway, I would just start with big strokes, right? Just big shapes with the sort of key points of the brief in mind, or at least the theme that I wanna communicate in mind. So it's a swamp. There's a big rocky outcrop. An outcrop being like a bunch of rocks, right? It's kind of a boulder or something. So kind of decompose this shape into two smaller shapes. And to that point, by the way, when you break up a shape, I advise you to not break it up in the middle, but to break it up kind of on the side, to make two sort of masses, secondary masses that are not of the same size, just so that we avoid like any uncanny symmetry that doesn't need to be there. A couple more rocks here and there. I just start very loose, and from you see I zoom out quite a lot just to not be dragged into small details too early. At this stage, I tried just very, very loose shapes. And I have this tendency to use straight shapes, of course, but more curved shape are okay, if that's more of your style. But the point here is not to be dragged into small details just yet. Then I would go for, okay, there's a werewolf, as per the brief, perched onto the rock. So I would think, okay, this is kind of a looming creature, so we're going to see it from maybe below. You see, I sort of planned the horizon to be here, and therefore just sort of by, like logically, I'm going to try to, make sure that the objects that are above, like that are far away from the horizon, are viewed from, from a different angle. So as I'm doing this, even if these are flat layers, flat silhouettes, I'm trying to even at this stage to try to anticipate the angle of things, and how we can add drama, to these things. And we'll see very soon, after the thumbnails, I'll select one thumbnail and just drag it into my final composition, and then we'll actually build a perspective grid that sort of builds upon the original idea that we had, this sort of what we're setting up already here. So even without a perspective grid, try to anticipate these things, because that's a problem that I not a problem, so to speak, but a kind of a shortcoming or sort of early mistake maybe that I see in beginner artists or even our intermediate artists, is to this thing that regardless of the elevation, things are sometimes painted at the same level. For example, a guy with two eyes will be sort of always in the front view regardless of how high it is, relative to the horizon. So this is a thing that I try to at least try to hammer, kind of, in a way. Like, you probably heard me say this quite a few times already, even privately. Like, it's that's something I try to. It's just a simple mistake that I've noticed, and I try to fix it as early as possible. At least help you notice it. So this live stream will be a bit more practical. It's just me painting as I'm explaining things. So sometimes my ideas are a little choppy. I kind of hesitate between points. So I apologize in advance if it's not super smooth. But anyway, the second sort of problem that I realize here with my piece right now is that I sort of encounter this problem. A mass, for example, the rock here, that is too similar in size to the second, like this character, my main character. So pretty early on, I have to make a choice, right? Like, is this going to be like a much smaller character than the rocky outcrop? Which, for the theme, it would be, right? Like, it would have to be kind of smaller to indicate that it's maybe a big boulder, a kind of a jagged, kind of looming figure of a rock. And sometimes, the client will tell you this, like, hey, this is way too big, or way too small. You have to be able to rearrange proportions kind of on a whim, right? So that's why I keep these compositions very, very simple. You see in this case here, this way, if we need to change anything in proportion, it's not like I committed to a bunch of details already, and sometimes it can be a little disheartening. Oops, sorry, that's too early. Here, it can be a little disheartening if you already committed too much. So at this stage, I'm like, okay, comparing shapes and sizes, proportions. What's gonna take center stage? And organizing the silhouette of this midground. This is our midground, pretty much. I should actually make it a little lighter, because I'm going to make a foreground that is going to be darker. And then, okay, so right now I'm going to show you also like my next step, which would be probably at this point a foreground. Like, it's not necessarily like in this chronological order, and we'll actually navigate between steps, between effects, but I just for the sake of it, I'm just going to start right now, my second step being the foreground. So again, with this idea of anticipating, right, I'm trying to show a sense of depth, a sense of that we're not just looking at the midground there of the werewolf on the rock, but that I'm actually trying to convey this idea of there's an extreme foreground, maybe close to us, and think about the story. You know, what can it mean? It means that the viewer may be hidden in the reeds here, in this vegetation. I'm already trying to sort of, you see, echo from left to right, repeat shapes to sort of balance my composition. And try to imagine maybe soon, you know, as we move on to early rendering and you know, more elaborate composition, just grass won't cut it, right? It will need more varied bits and pieces of vegetation. And so we'll see that very soon in the third part, the vegetation tutorial. But at this stage, kind of as early as possible, try to ask yourself like the tough questions, you know, what am I actually going to paint? And how am I, what story am I trying to tell? And by the way, like a thing that I recommend also is that you select a reference piece that you like, and try to replicate the levels, the numbers of planes, you know, foreground, extreme foreground, midground, background, extreme background, you see, and try to sort of replicate the amount of planes like this, and how they're composed also. You know, some illustrations might have more elements on one side, of course, being a little asymmetrical, a little bit more dynamic. Anything is possible, really. Like, nothing is by default correct or incorrect, but it all has to be a purposeful sort of choice, right? I just, as early as possible, want to sort of dispel the idea that good artists are artists who just effortlessly, you know, intuitively just conjure up good compositions. It's, at least in my case, and I think in the case of most people, it takes a sort of deliberate effort that gets easier with time. You know, it's just a repetitive exercise, right? It's always the same challenge every time, just a different format, a different brief, but the steps are the same. So I'm just showing you my steps and how you know, how I compartmentalize, how I deconstruct my process in bite-size, you know, steps to better digest them, so to speak, right? To better to make the most out of each. Okay, so we have a kind of a foreground element, kind of a midground here. I'll make it even brighter, just so. Okay, my foreground pops a little more. And now I would do at this stage a few suggestions of background using a lighter color like this. So you see all these layers are clipped onto my main, you know, canvas layer here. I'll save before I forget, big thing. And like any other environment detail, what I'm doing right now, these sort of big shapes, are just here to support the character and sort of justify visually this composition. It's not just a gratuitous, you know, a character just standing there for no reason. It's actually supported visually, reinforced visually. So at the beginning, I was doing just sort of vines like this, just sort of anticipating maybe a jungle or something like that, you know, something kind of intricate, kind of hard to escape, you know, tying in with the idea of telling a story with these simple shapes, right? Just like we did with the foreground, this idea of, is the viewer hidden in the reeds, or at least, you know, at eye level with the reeds, creating this sort of tension and this relationship between the werewolf and the viewer. Is it, you know, is the viewer an adventurer? Is he already detected, you know, by the werewolf, or is he sort of maybe still able to hide in the reeds? And same with these background elements. I'm thinking, okay, that could be vines that maybe that could make the scene look even more claustrophobic or more like a trap, which is the you know, the theme, the main keyword, the title of this art challenge, right? So when you think of a trap, you think of a spider web, of a net, something like that. So these vines can act as such, right? Can sort of remind the viewer of, oh yeah, like this is definitely not, you know, easy to go through. And thematically speaking, the werewolf would be sort of, you know, the spider at the center of the web.